What would you do if you saw a young boy being publicly humiliated by someone stronger than him, and no one did anything about it? That night, Jason Statham was in the audience, but he didn't sit around for long. He wasn't invited to fight. He didn't even plan on getting in the ring. But when he saw the injustice, he made a decision that would change everything. What happened in that arena, no one will ever forget. The sky over Chicago was covered with low-hanging clouds as Jason Statham stepped out of the rental car. The street was narrow, with yellow lights hanging from old posts that barely illuminated the uneven sidewalks. The gym's facade looked like something out of another time. Weathered bricks, barred windows, and a rusted sign that barely revealed the name of the place. But for those familiar with the street fighting scene, that place was almost legendary. Jason walked slowly, hands in his pockets, the hood of his jacket pulled down to his forehead. He didn't want to be recognized. Not here, not now. Inside, the noise was different. Punches striking heavy bags, muffled shouts, local judges in faded shirts marking points with old pens. The audience, a mix of workers, rowdy teens, curious veterans, and frustrated trainers, buzzed with a raw and tense energy. In that space, fighting wasn't about technique, it was about survival. Jason was greeted with discreet nods from a few familiar faces. An older trainer acknowledged him with a quick glance and pointed to an empty wooden bench in the corner of the stands. Jason sat down. Nothing about him drew attention, except the eyes. Those cold, experienced eyes that scanned every movement in the ring as if searching for something beyond the punches. The neighborhood's amateur tournament was in its semi-final. The upcoming match had stirred whispers all day. On one side, a skinny boy, knees trembling, with a blue bandana tied around his wrist. On the other, a cocky local champion, known more for his brutality than for technique. He had won nearly every previous bout by knockout, and made a point to humiliate his opponents while doing it. The boy's name was Evan. No one bet on him. As the referee called the fighters to the center, Jason leaned slightly forward. Not out of curiosity, but because of something undefined. There was something about that boy, the way he held his fists, not with confidence, but with faith. A fragile, desperate kind of faith that said, "I just want to make it through this." The first punch didn't take long, and it was devastating. Evan fell. He didn't give up. He stood up, took another, and another. The crowd laughed. Some recorded. Others shouted things that mixed encouragement with mockery. But Jason didn't move. His fists were clenched. His jaw was tight. That wasn't a fight. It was a public execution. Evan staggered. His face bled. The champion laughed. He stomped around the ring taunting, and then, in one swift motion, he kicked the boy. With contempt. Evan fell face first to the floor. The gym erupted. Euphoric screams echoed from the stands. But Jason didn't react. He simply stood up. He walked down the wooden steps as if time had slowed. His body moved with the calm of someone who had seen it all before. And even so, something in his chest burned as if it were the first time. He said nothing. He just looked. At the boy lying on the floor. At the champion laughing. At the ashamed trainer. And finally, at the center of the ring, the crowd began to sense it. One by one, the smiles faded. The phones lowered. Someone whispered something. Another murmured, "It's him." Jason stopped beside the event organizer. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He simply held his gaze. The referee, confused, looked toward the organizers. The crowd fell into utter silence. A silence that felt suffocating compared to the chaos moments before. Then the announcer grabbed the microphone with trembling hands. He said something simple, something that froze the air in the room like winter had crept through the brick walls. Jason Statham has just signed up for tonight's next fight, against the champion. The champion, who had been basking in his own glory, stopped smiling. His jaw dropped for a brief second. His eyes searched the organizer's face for confirmation, but all he received was the certainty of an official announcement. Jason climbed into the ring. No theatrics, no warm-up. He just stepped in. And for the first time that night, no one cheered, no one shouted, no one smiled. Silence reigned. The boy was still being helped off the floor. But even through the pain, he managed to glance at the man who had just taken his pain upon himself. His eyes met Jason's for a moment, and in that gaze was something stronger than any punch. There was respect. There was redemption. The champion, now across the ring, seemed smaller, not physically, but emotionally. His confidence had visible cracks. His stance still mimicked that of a fighter, but something in the stiffness of his neck, in the movement of his hands, revealed that this was no longer the same match. Jason stared at the center of the ring as if it were an altar to something sacred. To him, this wasn't a fight. It was reparation. The bell hadn't rung yet, but everyone knew. The real fight of the night was about to begin. Not between muscles, but between values. Not between two men, but between two ways of seeing the world. The bell rang with a sharp symbolic snap. In the ring, the champion puffed out his chest, trying to recover the posture of superiority he had always worn like armor. But now, standing before Jason Statham, that shell looked fragile, thin as glass on the verge of shattering. Jason didn't move. He stood motionless at the center of the ring like a living statue. His eyes fixed, not on his opponent, but on something beyond him. As if his mind were in another time, another fight. His arms hung loosely at his sides, chest steady, breath controlled. He didn't need words, and perhaps that was exactly what made him so intimidating. The crowd remained silent. It was a heavy, uncomfortable silence. People didn't know if they were about to witness a fight or something greater, something they couldn't yet name. The champion lunged with a quick punch, more out of impulse than strategy. But Jason didn't react in haste. He simply pivoted slightly to the side, dodging by mere inches, as if dancing with time. The punch hit nothing but air. Another strike followed, stronger, more desperate. Jason moved again, evading like someone who understood the motion before it even began. His feet barely scratched the ground. It was as if he were gliding in silence. Murmurs began to return to the stands. Not cheers yet, but voices of surprise, admiration, disbelief. The champion kept trying, and failing. Nothing connected. Jason still hadn't even raised his fists. And that was breaking the opponent from the inside. The trainer who had invited Jason watched from the corner of the gym. He knew the actor had trained for years, that his skill was real, forged outside the movie sets. But what he was seeing went beyond technique. It was absolute control of the moment, a mastery few possess because it doesn't come from the body, but from the soul. In the ring, the champion was breathing harder, sweating, no longer smiling. His movements were becoming erratic, shorter. He was beginning to realize he wasn't facing an actor. He was facing a man who had learned through life that silence is the weapon of those who have nothing left to prove. Finally, Jason raised one of his hands, slowly, like someone warning, not threatening. And then, at the exact moment the champion charged again, he moved. The first strike was too fast for the eye to fully catch. But the sound, it echoed. It wasn't violent. It was sharp, precise. The impact landed on the champion's shoulder, destabilizing his upper body. He staggered back 2 steps, didn't fall, but felt it. And more than physical pain, he felt the weight of emotional imbalance. Jason stepped forward. The champion stepped back instinctively. For the first time, the crowd exhaled collectively. A moment of realization. Something important was happening here. This wasn't a spectacle. It was a silent reckoning between two worlds. Jason wasn't striking out of rage, nor for fame. He was striking with something the champion didn't understand: awareness. Every one of his movements seemed to carry years of lessons, losses, scars not on the skin, but deep in memory. And then came the second blow. Simple, fast, a straight punch to the stomach. The champion fell to his knees, not from force, but because something inside him was beginning to collapse. Jason stepped back a few paces, let the opponent breathe. He didn't crush him, didn't finish him. He simply watched as if saying, "Stand up, but bring a different posture with you." The referee looked between the two of them, confused, almost intimidated. It was rare to need intervention while a match was still in progress, but Jason seemed to be dictating his own rules, and no one dared to challenge them. The champion rose with effort. His gaze was different now, no longer arrogant. There was doubt, and deeply buried, a seed of respect. He wasn't just facing another fighter, he was facing himself. The distorted image he had built for years, based on dominance, shouts, and mockery. Jason knew it. That's why he remained silent. That's why he didn't attack when the opponent was most vulnerable. The fight went on for a few more minutes. The champion managed to land a few scattered blows, but Jason absorbed, dodged, and countered without cruelty. The crowd no longer cried out for blood. Many now watched standing, phones lowered, as if they understood, even without words, that they were witnessing something rarer than a good fight. A silent lesson. From the corner of the ring, Evan watched everything. With a swollen face and tearful eyes, he saw the same man who had once silently observed from the stands now standing up for his dignity. And that, for the boy, meant more than any punch. Jason remained steady. His movements were fluid but sharp. His gaze held no hatred, but it was full of purpose. With each second, more people understood what was at stake. It wasn't about winning. It was about transforming. And then, when the champion fell again, this time from a clean shot to the jaw, the entire arena held its breath. Jason stepped back. The champion on his knees didn't get up right away. His eyes stared at the sweat-stained mat as if finally seeing his own broken reflection. His breathing was heavy, but his fists were no longer clenched. As Jason walked toward the center of the ring, the crowd made no sound. They only watched. Because something was about to happen, something that no longer involved fists, but the collapse of ego. The champion looked up and saw Jason's hand extended, not to shake it, but to stop him from standing before he truly learned. The ring, once a stage for mockery and shouting, had become a sacred space of silence. An improvised temple where two worlds clashed, not with screams nor with anger, but with quiet truths. The champion, kneeling, breathed as if each breath were an internal battle. Around him, the audience didn't dare to move. The cell phone cameras trembled in the hands that held them, not from excitement, but from respect. Jason Statham hadn't just interrupted a tournament, he had redefined the moment. Jason's extended hand hovered like an invitation, not to surrender but to reflect. The champion looked up but didn't take it. There was something in the gesture that didn't ask for contact but for awareness, as if saying, "Get up different, or don't get up at all." Then Jason stepped back. He gave space. He didn't need to end the fight with a punch, because in that moment something deeper had already been defeated. The persona the champion had created to survive in the noise. But the bell hadn't rung, and the referee, hesitant, looked between the two, unsure whether to intervene. Jason gave a subtle nod, small but firm. It was enough. The fight would continue, but with a new language. The champion slowly stood up. His shoulders no longer puffed. His chest, once inflated by vanity, now moved in the exact rhythm of humility. He raised his fists, not out of pride, but out of commitment. He knew he needed to finish this on his feet. He needed to receive each movement as a lesson. Jason stepped toward the center again, and the dance resumed. This time there was rhythm, technique, respect. Jason delivered calculated blows, firm but clean. He didn't want to hurt, he wanted to show. With each punch to the stomach, he knocked down another layer of arrogance. With each perfect dodge, he proved that control isn't domination. And when he struck the jaw with precision, he made his opponent understand that real strength doesn't shout, it teaches. The crowd, once bloodthirsty, now applauded in silence. The claps came slowly, sincerely, without hysteria. For the first time that night, the audience was learning from what they were seeing. On the sidelines, trainers watched with teary eyes. A security guard in the back of the gym lowered his hood. Even the teens who had laughed earlier now watched with reverence. Because everyone knew, even without saying it, that they were witnessing something rare, a man who chose to deliver justice without hate. Jason moved through the ring like a war veteran tired of war. His eyes were locked but not cold. His body was strong but not arrogant. He was everything the champion needed to have seen before, and never had. Across from him, the champion was giving way. Not in strength, but in posture. His punches weakened, his guard lowered. Not because he gave up, but because he was tired of pretending. Tired of being the character everyone applauded but who had never truly existed. And then came the decisive moment. Jason stepped closer. The champion attempted one last strike, a fast hook. Jason dodged with a precise turn and in one fluid motion, delivered a clean blow to the abdomen. The champion fell, not knocked out, not unconscious. He fell sitting and didn't try to get up. He stayed there, breathing, sweating, staring at the floor as if seeing his own reflection for the first time. Jason stepped back. He looked around. His eyes found the boy, Evan, still in the corner, his face swollen, but his eyes bright. The boy didn't smile, but there was something in his eyes that smiled from within. Something like hope. The referee hesitated. He looked at Jason, then at the crowd, and finally, at the champion, still seated. He didn't need to say anything. The fight was over. But the message was just beginning. Jason didn't raise his arms. He didn't celebrate. He simply took a deep breath, glanced one last time at his opponent, and then left the ring with the same serenity with which he had entered it. But what he had left behind, no one would forget. Not the audience, not the champion, not the boy. In the minutes that followed, the gym exploded, but not with cheers, with applause. Long applause. Slow applause. Applause born from hidden tears. Because everyone there had changed. Hours later, videos of the fight began to spread. But the edits didn't focus on punches. They focused on looks, on gestures, on silences. The internet began to realize that what had happened that night was more than a physical performance. It was a social lesson. Humility had won, and on the other side of the city in a small apartment, a boy with bruises on his face watched everything on a tiny phone screen, his eyes glowing, not with pain, but with gratitude. Because someone who didn't even know him had the courage to see him. And the next morning early, an anonymous envelope was left in the gym's locker room. Inside, a handwritten message. Sometimes a punch doesn't break bones, it breaks masks. It was written in strong handwriting, but unsigned. The sun had not fully risen when Jason woke up. The hotel room was simple, functional, just the way he liked it. No luxuries, no distractions, just a wide window and thick curtains that filtered the faint light of the morning. He sat at the edge of the bed, shirtless. The sweat from the night still clung to his back, but it wasn't the heat that had awakened him. It was the weight of memory. On the nightstand beside him rested the envelope, the one he had left in the locker room himself unsigned. The firm handwriting still looked alive. He didn't need to read it again. He knew exactly what it said. Jason stood up, walked to the mirror, and stared at his own reflection. There were lines on his face that hadn't been there 10 years ago. Lines that didn't come from age, but from invisible scars. Each one told a story, and all of them led back to the same place. The ring. But not the one from the night before. Another one. Long before fame. Long before Hollywood. Jason closed his eyes. And then the images came. The dim lights of an old gym. The smell of blood mixed with cheap disinfectant, the muffled roar of the crowd, and the dry thud of a body hitting the floor. He remembered the color of the ring ropes, red, worn out. And he remembered the face of the friend who fell that day. He was different from the arrogant champion. His friend had been calm, reserved. He fought because he loved the sport, because he wanted to protect his family, a young man without pretensions, without bravado. But that night, he faced someone like the champion in Chicago, someone driven by vanity, applause, and humiliation. And no one did anything. No one stopped the fight, not even Jason. He had been there, watching, too young to have a voice, strong enough to intervene, but weak enough to hesitate. That moment never left him. His friend didn't die that day, but something in him did, and Jason never forgave himself for it. Since then, he carried the ghosts in silence. Ghosts that followed him through every workout, every film set, every interview. Ghosts that made him fight not against people, but against ideas. Ideas like the one that says humiliating someone is a show of strength. That's why when he saw young Evan being crushed in front of everyone, he couldn't stay seated. It was like reliving it all, like seeing his friend fall again. But this time, he wouldn't let it happen. In the Chicago ring, he wasn't just facing a champion. He was facing what he hadn't faced years ago, his own silence. Jason washed his face with cold water, put on the same black t-shirt from the day before, and left the room. Outside, the city was already waking up. Horns, the smell of coffee, people in a rush. But Jason walked slowly. He headed toward a quiet street where he knew there was a community center, a small place known for taking in at-risk youth. He had heard about it before, and now something was pulling him there. When he arrived, he didn't expect what he saw. Inside, in a wide room with blue mats on the floor, the former champion was teaching basic boxing movements to a group of children. There were no cameras, no applause, no followers around, just sweat and effort. Jason stood in the doorway, watching. The former champion, now wearing a gray sweatshirt, eyes lowered, was correcting a skinny boy's posture with patience. No yelling, no humiliation. The change wasn't in his words. It was in his posture. Jason didn't walk in, he didn't introduce himself, he just observed. Because sometimes the greatest impact one can make doesn't come from presence, but from a presence that's felt in absence. He left the community center the same way he had come. Quiet. Reflective. On the sidewalk, a boy held a crumpled pamphlet. Jason took one and read, "Self-esteem and discipline for all ages. Here, everyone matters." And then he knew that fight had truly changed something. But ghosts don't vanish easily. That night back at the hotel, Jason received a phone call. It was the trainer who had invited him to the event. His voice was emotional. The video of the fight had already surpassed 1 million views. But what stood out wasn't the punches. It was the comments. Hundreds of stories from people who had once been humiliated, discredited, ignored, and who, for the first time, felt seen. The story was no longer about Jason. It was about everyone who had ever fallen in an unfair ring. Jason hung up and sat in silence. In front of him, the window reflected the city. But he didn't see buildings. He saw that gym. He saw his friend. He saw Evan, his face bruised but his heart strong. And he saw himself as someone who once had remained silent, but now had answered. The next morning, a brown envelope was left at the hotel front desk. No sender. Inside, a letter written in trembling handwriting. "When I fell in that ring, I thought I was alone, but someone saw me. Thank you for that, Evan." The video of the fight kept circulating, but unlike what many expected, it didn't go viral for the usual reasons. There was no fast-paced editing, no dramatic music, no blood, no spectacular knockout. There was silence. There was control. There was presence. That's what people talked about. The way Jason stared at his opponent. The way he walked around the ring, without haste, without anger. The way he didn't respond with brutality, but with presence. The most shared clips weren't of punches. They were of the extended hand, the fallen champion, the boy watching with teary eyes. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, the world was paying attention to what isn't said. Online, the comments multiplied. "I've never seen someone silence a crowd with just a look." "This video reminded me of the day a manager humiliated me just because I wore the wrong clothes." "Jason didn't fight a man, he fought a system." I cried watching. I saw myself in that boy. And it wasn't just online. Training centers began using the video in discipline and ethics classes. Support groups for bullied teens shared segments of it as an example of strength without aggression. Social programs that fought for visibility found in that fight the perfect narrative, a symbol that someone with a voice can still use it without saying a single word. Jason, in turn, remained silent. He declined interviews, ignored invitations to talk shows, avoided editorials, magazine covers, advertising campaigns. He didn't want to turn it into a spectacle, because for him it was already enough. But the world didn't stop. At the gym where it all happened, a letter was left at the door. It was from a father. He said his son, who was thinking about quitting sports for being too small, saw the video and decided to continue. Another letter came from a public school, a teacher asking permission to show the video during a class on respect. The video had crossed borders, and everywhere it reached, it left something behind, a new way of seeing. At the community center where the former champion now coached kids, the number of enrollments doubled in a week, and no one there called him champ. They called him by name, and that for him was a first. He no longer wore flashy outfits, no more loud theatrics. He wore sweatshirts, and he listened. He taught calmly. He corrected gently. He had learned that true strength is the ability to shrink yourself so others can grow. Jason learned of this when he received a second letter. It wasn't from Evan. It was from a retired fighter who had watched the match silently, in a hospital. He had lost his voice during throat surgery, but wrote in the letter that Jason had spoken for him. The letter read, "I never stepped into a ring again after being morally crushed by someone, not physically, emotionally, and no one saw it. But I saw you, and for the first time, I didn't feel weak." Jason read the letter more than once, then carefully folded it and tucked it into a notebook where he kept only a few written things, just phrases, excerpts, reflections. Among them, an old note he had written years ago. "It's not what you say. It's what you allow others to feel beside you." And in that moment, he understood. That fight was never about him. It was about all those who carry the burden of being diminished, and about all those who have the chance to not repeat the cycle. By the end of that week, an anti-bullying nonprofit launched a campaign called Stand Up in Silence. Jason's video was the closing segment. No edits, no soundtrack, just the sounds of the gym and the sound of a crowd being silenced by awareness. The impact was greater than expected. Jason was invited to be the face of the campaign, but he declined. Instead, he suggested they put Evan in his place, an ordinary boy, because true heroes don't wear capes. They wear bruises, stares, and courage. Evan, hesitant, accepted, not out of vanity, but because he felt he owed it to someone, and to himself. He appeared in a short video looking into the camera saying, "I thought no one would defend me, but a stranger stepped into the ring for me. Now, it's my turn to step in for others." His words moved people even more than punches, because deep down the greatest battles are fought inside those who almost gave up. Jason, from a distance, watched everything, not as a star, but as a witness. And in the midst of it all, a new message reached him. This time it wasn't a letter. It was a video, recorded by a boxing coach from the countryside. The video showed a girl with partial paralysis in her arms learning to move her fists with her father. The caption was simple: "If even silence can teach, then I can fight." Jason didn't reply. He just saved the video to his phone. And that night, while the city slept, he walked back to the gym in Chicago. It was closed. But he stood outside for a few minutes, closed his eyes, and smiled. Because now he knew that silence had spoken louder than any scene he'd ever performed. The next morning, as he left the hotel, Jason found an envelope discreetly placed on his car's dashboard. Inside, a single folded sheet with a handwritten phrase, "He who turns pain into purpose has already won, even before the fight." Winter arrived slowly in Chicago. The streets, once vibrant, now felt suspended in time. The wind swept dry leaves along the sidewalks, while the gray sky made the air feel more introspective. It was as if the city were breathing more slowly, as if it were reflecting. Jason had returned, not for a new event, not for a fight, just to observe. No bodyguards, no fanfare, no announcement that he was back. A few weeks had passed since that night in the gym, but its echoes still vibrated in many places, not only on social media or in the news, but in the small, invisible gestures of everyday life. On a bench in the square beside a community sports center, Jason sat. His dark coat concealed his identity. He watched without being noticed. In front of him, a group of children practiced light punches, guided by a focused young man. It was the former champion. His face had changed, not just because of the unshaven beard or the longer hair, but because of his posture. He walked differently now, spoke less, listened more. His tone had dropped several levels, and in doing so, it had risen in respect. Across the court, Evan was there too. Stronger, more confident. He didn't just train with his arms. He trained with his head held high, eyes alert. Now he walked with the stride of someone who had survived something greater than defeat. Jason smiled softly. There before him stood two men who had changed. And he hadn't needed to raise his voice to make it happen. As he observed, a young woman approached the former champion. She handed him something wrapped, a simple gift. He opened it. It was a navy blue hardcover book. Inside, a handwritten dedication. For teaching without shouting, for changing without hurting. Jason quietly stood and walked along the side of the building. Inside, the community center still carried the smell of old wood and fresh sweat. Posters were taped to the windows, motivational phrases written in colorful letters. But one in particular caught his eye. Greatness isn't in winning, it's in lifting someone up while the world watches you. The quote was paired with a simple printed image. It was him. Jason standing in the ring, his hand extended. The image had no caption. It didn't need one. Before leaving, he walked to the administration office and discreetly left something on the desk. A white envelope, plain, with no name. Inside, a single handwritten note. The handwriting was firm, precise. Some blows make us hard, others make us aware. Thank you for choosing the second. And beneath the phrase, only a silent signature, he left the building unseen, but his presence would remain there for a long time. Across the city, Ramon, the same coach who had invited Jason to watch the fight weeks earlier, opened an envelope he'd received by mail. Inside was a second letter. It was from Evan. The boy now wrote with confidence. His words had rhythm, direction. Coach Ramon, I only wanted to fight once in my life, but I was knocked down before I had the chance to show who I was. His presence in that ring didn't save me from a knockout. It saved me from giving up on myself. And below that, one more sentence. He who rises in silence carries crowds with him. Ramon couldn't hold back the tears. He framed the letter and hung it in the main hallway of the gym, alongside other memories. Old medals, worn-out gloves, dusty trophies. But that letter would become the most valuable artifact in that space. In the following days, the stories kept coming. Children who started training after watching the video. Parents who began hugging children they'd once drifted away from. Men who apologized for words said in moments of pride. The change wasn't immediate, nor gigantic. It was quiet, but steady and real, because it was silent. Jason Statham returned to his routine, back to training, back to film sets, but something had shifted, and even when the camera lights turned on, he knew that the most important scene he'd ever performed had no script, no direction, only truth. He continued receiving letters. Some came with shaky handwriting, others just drawings. One of them, from a child, read, "I don't like hitting, but now I know I can be strong anyway." Jason kept it with all the others, in a small wooden box, silent, where he also kept old clippings, memories, and the letter he received years ago from a friend who never returned to the ring. There, everything made sense. Everything came together. Months later, Evan received an invitation to speak at a school about his experience. He accepted. At the end of the talk, as everyone was leaving, a girl approached him with a timid look. She said nothing, just handed him a crumpled piece of paper written in blue ink. "Thank you for showing that even someone who falls can be an example." Evan smiled, folded the paper gently, and as he left, he looked up at the sky. The same city that once felt too big to protect him now gave back something he never thought he deserved. A voice. Jason never returned to the gym where he fought, but the ring, the bench where he sat, the floor he stepped on, all of it carried his invisible presence. And just as he wanted, his greatest fight wasn't recorded on a trophy, but in a legacy, discreet, silent, indestructible. On the last page of the notebook where Jason wrote reflections, only one sentence occupied the final line. Sometimes the world needs someone to enter in silence and leave everything changed. It wasn't just a fight, it was a message, a silence that spoke louder than any punch. If this story touched you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because here, each story has the power to transform. And remember, sometimes the world just needs someone to enter silently and leave with everything different.